our networks of churches and universities were a place where our democracy kept itself knitted together and created, for all of its flaws, a conversation about a moral vision for our nation.
From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch in New York City.
And that has, in so many ways, simply disappeared. We are lost as a nation when it comes to moral discourse.
Reverend Dr. Serene Jones is the first woman to lead the historic Union Theological Seminary here in New York City. After 18 years as president, she is stepping down from that role, and this week she'll be with us to talk about the stained glass ceiling, her experiences at the helm of an institution that counts Senator Raphael Warnock, Melissa Harris Perry, David Gushee, Suzanne Johnson Cook, Jim Forbes, and even yours truly, among the countless many who have attended since that institution's founding in 1836. We'll also talk about the place of faith in American democracy, about her memoir, Call It Grace, Finding Meaning in a Fractured World, and about what a spiritual calling looks like in 2026.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
We need voices like Serene Jones to be heard now more than ever. Please make sure you subscribe, share, and rate The State of Belief on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform. Taking a minute to do these things really helps other people discover our show and become listeners too. Our library of past conversations includes over 180 hopeful, empowering, and inspiring interviews with guests like Associate Attorney General Vanita Gupta, Bishop William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign, Rabbi Sharon Brous, and many others. You can help us grow The State of Belief with a financial contribution right now. Find out how at stateofbelief.com, and you can support and join the work of Interfaith Alliance at interfaithalliance.org. Before I get to the interview, I want to welcome everyone to Pride Month. Happy Pride. And I recognize that, it hits a little differently right now where there's so clearly an effort to diminish LGBTQ people, specifically trans people, but also folks like myself who are in a same-sex marriage and other ways that people are being denigrated in our community. But you know what? We don't have to accept that. And this is a time for us to be, just loving towards our communities, towards our people, and towards everyone. And, a couple things to mention. Please go on interfaithalliance.org and you will find an incredible report that my colleague Guthrie Graves Fitzsimmons did about same-gender marriage and how it totally aligns with freedom of religion. And that's just such a really important paper. And it's the third edition we've done of it. Like we did two of them before gay marriage became legal, and now we have this one really talking about how all the things that people were scared of that same-sex marriage would bring, like the diminishment of marriage or the infringement on churches' rights or any of that, none of it came to pass. In fact, freedom of religion is just as strong as it ever has been, in fact, a little bit more so. And yet same-sex marriage has been allowed to thrive. Marriage equality can and does live side by side with religious freedom. And also stay tuned because I'm going to be in the next few weeks going to be having an interview with my own husband, Brad Gooch, who has a beautiful new book out called Good Morning Moon. You'll all recognize that. There's a famous children's book called Good Night Moon. Brad's book is called Good Morning Moon, A Snapshot of an American Family, and it's about our family and, what it's like to have get married, have children, and And it's a beautiful story about like what it means to be a parent and what it means to love as a family. And so I hope you'll all check that out and look forward to that interview. So have a great month, Pride Month, and we'll be talking more about that in the future. And now to my guest. Reverend Dr. Serene Jones was a professor at Yale University, president of the American Academy of Religion, and for the past 18 years, president of the historic Union Theological Seminary in New York City. The institution promises to prepare its students for committed lives of service to the church, academy, and society. And Serene Jones is the first woman president in Union Seminary's 188-year history. This month, Reverend Jones is stepping down from this important role, but after a sabbatical, she will be back at Union to teach, write, and continue her public theological engagement as Johnston Family Chair for Religion and Democracy. Dr. Serene Jones, welcome to the State of Belief.
Oh, well, it's so great to be here and I'm in conversation with you.
Oh, my goodness. And, of course, my alma mater, my beloved Union. And, it's very funny. Like when I talk about my time at Union, I say it was the hardest 3 years of my life. And it was the most important thing that I ever did. I think that probably still resonates with people who are a part of Union Seminary.
I hear that over and over and over again from every graduate.
It is, it is not an easy place. Like, we're not at Bible camp there, but it is a place where you truly engage a tradition, engage all the resources and texts and teachings of a tradition, and maybe even most importantly, you gauge other students and faculty in a way that expands your mind, your soul, your spirit, everything. So what does it feel like to be stepping down after 18 years? This is happening right now. We're in the middle of it. So you must have lots of emotions.
Oh, I do. I have so many emotions. I made the decision last summer. My daughter actually had just graduated from Union, which what greater honor could a parent have than to have their child coming along and following in their footsteps at this place. And then she got married and I was going through all these milestones and I woke up one morning and I could just feel in my whole being that I wasn't finished by any means with Union, but that it was time for me to stop being the president and to move into a new role and to have new leadership come in. And it was a very joyful decision for me. But it was also, as I've gone through the year and now I'm getting very close to the end date, I approach it also with sadness because I have loved these past 18 years. They've been the best 18 years of my life.
Wow.
They've changed me profoundly. And I tell people they've grown me up in ways I didn't even know I was going to grow up. So I can say it's been the hardest 18 years of my life and the best 18 years.
Okay, to keeping with the theme.
Yeah.
But, one thing that you said that just really reminds me that in the world that we inhabit, not everything is just in the brain. Some of it is in the spirit. And being attuned to something like a call, and you could be called away from things just as you could be called to things. Can you talk a little bit, take us back? We're going to get into all the Union stuff, but I would love for our listeners to hear a little bit more about where you come from. Where did you grow up? How did you first become introduced to religion at all?
Oh, well, that's a great question. I grew up in the Disciples of Christ Church in Oklahoma, mostly, a little bit in North Texas, where my family's been for generations. And so I grew up in a very progressive but deeply religious household. And my father was himself a theologian and a professor and a minister. So it's in a way I went into the family business, but from a very different standpoint. He grew up with a different generation than I have. And I remember early conversations in the 60s and 70s that we would have arguments about women's ordination and gay ordination. And I made my way from the University of Oklahoma, where I was in school with 13 cousins. That's how Okie I am.
Wow.
I am Okie through and through. But then I went to Yale Divinity School and I had to make a decision between Union and Yale, and I grew up in a household where I heard more about Union, actually, in terms of just the incredible theologians that had come through this place. But I got a better scholarship,
Uh-huh.
so that always plays a big role. And taught there, ended up staying and teaching for 18 years. And
Wow.
so, um,
This theme of 18, I think there's something there. It's really
yes,
interesting.
someone reminded me it takes 18 years to raise a kid. So it's
Oh,
like actually a
wow.
significant number.
Really interesting,
Yeah.
really
So,
interesting. And
yeah.
so, did you feel called specifically to the ministry, to the academy, to both? What was all that like? Because I think one of the great things about seminary, and when I was at Princeton and I was dealing with students from all different backgrounds, I would always be like, have you considered divinity school? Have you considered, no matter what they were studying? And they were like, how did you know that that was somewhere inside me? You can go to divinity school or seminary and not necessarily know exactly why you're going. Like, did you, when you felt like, okay, I'm going to go, did you know, okay, I want to serve in churches or I want to be in the academy? What did that feel like in your spirit?
So while I was an undergraduate at OU, I took my first philosophy and theology classes.
Hmm.
And I was like, wow, people like study this stuff. This is fascinating. These big, huge questions about the meaning of life. And it was also in college where I became a really engaged activist. Like I
Uh-huh.
wanted to be involved in changing the world. This was the um, late 70s, early 80s. And so it was the big questions and it was activism. And I gave a lot of thought initially, like I think a lot of seminary students do. Should I do that at law school? But then
Hmm.
the more I thought about it, I realized if I went to law school, I would actually be, pushing paper mostly. And so divinity school, seminary seemed the place where you could go and I could continue to develop these loves I had, this desire to engage the world this way. I knew when I went to seminary that I wanted to be ordained, and in the disciples, there's a long tradition of ordaining women. Um, but I could feel the pull more towards the academic and activist side than the congregational ministry side.
Yeah, yeah.
So that when I graduated, I started in a PhD program was not a surprise to me, but I couldn't have seen that from my undergraduate perspective.
Uh-huh.
It was
Yeah,
it was during seminary that the idea part of it and the activism part just kind of exploded inside of me.
yeah,
I couldn't
yeah.
imagine a better life than just doing this all the time.
Isn't that amazing? And you did, and you did. It's interesting. So much has changed since you went to seminary, since I went to seminary. I mean, talk about like we can even take it back to when you first went to seminary and what like seminaries or divinity schools, these places that were training the future religious leaders of the country or the world, how they understood their mission then. And like now you have, I'm doing math very quickly, but 36 years of experience. What is it? What are the ways? And we could just talk about this for like 3 hours. But what are the big ways that you see divinity schools and seminaries understanding themselves differently than they would have a generation ago or 2 generations ago?
Yes, it's changed so profoundly. When I started seminary, the vast majority of the students came from Protestant churches. They had been raised in families where they were well churched. I mean, they'd read the Bible, they had already formulated theological questions, and they were coming to seminary with a clear path towards either becoming a theologian or becoming a minister. And that was it. And it was a pretty monolithic group of people in terms of what we shared. Of course, we were all quirky in our own ways, but it was a clear path. And we studied Christianity and from all different perspectives. Of course, when I was arriving at seminary, we were just seeing the arrival of liberation theology onto the scene. And so we were reading James Cone, we were reading Gustavo Gutierrez, we were reading feminist theology. So I came in with that wave. that was bringing all of these contemporary political issues to the fore of theological reflection.
Mm.
So when I began teaching there, because of the generation I represented, I became the one who was teaching liberation theology, feminist theology, Black theology. And that was also a time in which, in my own education, all the people I was reading people from Union. Where
Right.
all of these movements were starting and gaining their momentum, and the really lively thinking was coming out of Union.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, when I went to Union, Dr. Cohn was there, and Dr. Beverly Harrison was there, and it was just, and it was funny, like kind of the old guard would come back and say, I was there at the golden years of Union. I was like, well, I kind of feel like I'm here at the golden era.
Yeah.
I mean, like, and I think we can, hopefully that gets played forward and everybody really appreciates when they're at Union, because Union is a different place even than when I graduated 30 years ago this year.
Yeah.
And it was definitely a different place in so many ways. It was fabulous in so many ways, but it's definitely expanded how it understands itself and its mission. I mean, and you were a big part of that. So can you talk a little bit about, like, specifically how you envisioned when you got to Union 18 years ago, and you inherited this incredible tradition, but also, Union had a lot going on, so we could talk about just the physical plant of Union for a while. But for this moment, can you talk about, like, how you started to imagine like what it meant to expand who belonged at Union and who could come to Union, who could learn at Union?
Yeah. Well, already when I arrived at Union, you could see the massive demographic shifts happening. And Union has always had a significant number of students who we used to call seekers.
Hmm.
Now they're just called unaffiliated. But Union has always been a place that has sent people out to do things other than just church ministry. But we send a significant number of people into pulpits. But arriving here and arriving in New York City, we're just 7 years away from 9/11. And the questions around the global state of religion, and as an activist, the political reality of the fact that we are a multi-religious world was so much alive for me. And I arrived around the same time that a year after the new chancellor came to Jewish Theological Seminary across the street, Arnie Eisen. And we began to have conversations about the absolute need for seminaries going forward to educate students in a multi-religious context, because that was our world. And we couldn't ethically do formation without taking into our consideration and into our ways of learning and into our ways of understanding ultimate reality, the way multiple traditions do it.
Yeah.
And so from those conversations with Arnie Eisen grew our first attempt to, and we succeeded in hiring a Muslim professor, Jerusha Rhodes.
Uh-huh.
And we went on to start a Buddhism program.
Yeah.
And those programs just immediately grew. I mean, it was so clear that we were meeting a need.
Yeah.
And especially in a place like New York City, which is such a multi-religious city. And more and more students were coming to Union because even though they were going to go into a Christian church, they could see the need to understand Islam. They could see the need to understand Judaism. And especially the interest in Buddhism was just exploding.
Yeah. Isn't
And
that something?
that program just continues to grow and grow faster than we can keep up with, because it is speaking something to this moment in time.
Up next, much more with the Reverend Dr. Serene Jones. You're going to want to keep listening for what a calling looks like in 2026. You can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com. You'll also find links to topics we discussed this week, as well as transcripts and more. And you can tell Alexa, Gemini, or Siri to play the podcast, The State of Belief, on any enabled device. Make sure you subscribe, share, and rate The State of Belief on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform. You're listening to The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. Welcome back to The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch. My guest is Reverend Dr. Serene Jones, longtime president of Union Theological Seminary in New York City. Well, let's talk about this moment in time because, this is a very, perilous moment. Many moments have been perilous for various communities. This one feels perilous for democracy itself. How do you understand this moment and what does it mean to prepare religious leadership for this kind of world that, the United States is entering into, the rest of the world as well?
Yeah. Well, Union has always been right in the face of the moment. We are not going to shy away from what we're confronting. And we are confronting what I experience every day as the decline and the crumbling of American empire and all that goes with that, all the possibilities that it portends, but also the pain and suffering that we are going through as a nation, and as a result, a world because of our country's actions. When I was in seminary and when you were in seminary, we would refer to the reality of fascism as something that had happened in the past. We never used it as an active word to describe our present situation. Authoritarianism was not on the tip of our tongues as something we had to confront theologically. For myself, when I was in seminary, I took the sustaining of democracy in America. I knew it was flawed, but I just took it for granted that this would go on. And now we are really right in the face of questions about the viability and the future of our nation itself. And our students need to not be, I wouldn't go so far as to say not be afraid, because it is normal to be afraid because it's scary things are happening. But they should have the courage to face it head on.
Yeah.
And to be a moral voice. And this is what Union was made for, to be moral voice in a time of crisis.
Right.
Speak clearly about justice and peace and love in this context, which might become controversial topics, oddly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Union has a slightly different history than many seminaries. Can you just say a word about that? Because it's interesting, I think, for me to think about that DNA thing of what is the purpose of Union versus a Yale or a Harvard or even a Duke or something like that. What Union has, it's the genesis of it, I think, is a really interesting story.
Yeah, what Union is doing now, it has always done in different keys. It was started by a group of pastors coming from New Haven and Princeton who had this radical idea at the time in 1836 that maybe ministers might learn more about what they need to do in ministry if they did it in the middle of a thriving, booming metropolis rather than in the quiet of the countryside. So this tiny group got together and started this little school on the docks of New York City, which in 1836 was a huge mix of immigrants from all over the world. It was just grappling with every single global issue. The globe was here, and it continues to be here. And that got into the DNA, and that's why it's written in our mission statement from the beginning, our charter. that we are here to educate people, to speak to the church, to the academy, and most importantly, to the world.
Yeah. And
And you
I remember coming up to Union for my kind of the open house day, and the word grappling. I just thought, oh, that's a really good word. That's a very Union word, like grappling. It's not something that comes up that much, but it feels very Union to me. You've talked a lot about the specific way that faith is important right now in defeating fascism, in in undermining authoritarianism. What are some of the things that you think are really important for our listeners to keep in mind as we meet this moment?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to be sort of tough and honest about is the degree to which, for all of its problem, our networks of churches and universities were a place where our democracy kept itself knitted together
Hmm.
and created, for all of its flaws, a conversation about a moral vision for our nation. And that has, in so many ways, simply disappeared. We are lost as a nation when it comes to moral discourse.
Hmm.
Even talking about why we're here, what we believe is the point of our life as a nation and as a people. And what the theological issue is, and what we take on here at Union, is that our job is to equip students to be those moral voices, whether it be in a pulpit, whether it be in a nonprofit, or whether it be in an activist street ministry.
Hmm.
In all of those places to help communities reclaim moral vision.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it's no mistake that our churches started crumbling, and then the next thing to follow was to see our universities start crumbling. So it's a process that's been going on for quite some time of ripping out the core of our nation, where you found that moral core which could push back against the kind of cruel efficiency of capitalism, which
Hmm.
now is what passes for the moral core of our nation,
Hmm.
which is has no ethics.
Right. Right. Well, it's the that's a really, really powerful point. And whatever the universities and the churches are going through is being exacerbated by this administration, which has specifically attacked,
Yes.
higher education, specifically attacked any religious groups that's not in lockstep with their political agenda is, actually often targeted, as the Catholic Church has learned. So that is, that's been very real. Talk more about I'm very intrigued by something that I learned, that you're interested in looking at, like the Theo Bros, not the Theo Bros. What are they?
Tech bros.
What are they?
Tech bros.
Tech Bros, not Theo Bros. Theo Tech Bros. I mean, no, but I mean, Peter Thiel views himself as like kind of a theologian in some ways. So I am curious, you'd mentioned capitalism, but now we've seen how, whatever was going on in Silicon Valley kind of, said, oh, well, we're good for the world. We're trying to make the world better. Do no evil. And now we're kind of like, oh, whoa, like we maybe swallowed that Kool-Aid for too long. How do you understand that theologically?
Well, I can well remember about a year and a half ago, the first time I picked up I think it was a long article in the New York Times, and read Peter Thiel's theology. And it just so happens that one of my areas of specialization is John Calvin
Oh,
and the
wow.
whole history of Calvinism. And here was this uber tech bro using John Calvin as a theologian to advocate for a kind of meritocracy where, of course, the smartest people in the world, which the tech bros would know who they were. Of course, it was the tech bros who had invented all this amazing technology should be actually running the world because they're so smart and they could just make it better for everybody. And this democracy business was just kind of like, was just going to continue to mess things up. And he was using John Calvin's
Wow.
notion of sovereignty, which Calvin applied that to God and said, only God is sovereign. There is no other sovereign. To say, oh, Calvin's God was sovereign, so therefore we need an earthly sovereign, which is going to be technology and those who run and own it. And I was like, wow, this is exact opposite of what
Uh-huh.
we learn in our theology courses about the core of the Reformation and Protestantism.
Uh-huh.
So I'm really raring to go when I get time, when I'm no longer president, to start writing more about this particular
Yeah, I think
theological.
it's only going to get more severe.
Yeah.
I mean, there's echoes of the kind of prosperity gospel or something where you kind of see people using like their success as an affirmation of their divine mandate
Yeah.
and like leaning completely into that as like it also means I'm supposed to lead and it also means that I'm supposed to accrue as much as I want and that God is blessing that. I mean, it just feels like I think we're in a moment right now where the kind of billionaire class really has this mindset that we are meant to be this. And
Yes.
it's like ordained in some way for us to be this, and that any sort of notion that maybe they're, um, taking advantage of the world is anathema to them, and they get very defensive. But I think that defensiveness shows their vulnerability.
Yeah, no, I mean, they've taken it so far as to think they're so great they should live forever. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
they even put technology into that. But the flip side of it is that people who are struggling, people who are poor, who are immigrants, who live on the margins of society, which is increasing numbers of people who can't even buy groceries anymore, that somehow they're in that position because they're not as smart, because
Oh,
they're
yeah.
not as wise and divinely ordained. And that's the really dangerous downside of it, is because you just divide the world into the haves and have nots, and the haves, God gave it to them, and the have nots, well,
I mean,
forget them. They don't really matter. And that's, most people are in that second group.
yeah. Well, and it's, you can't really read Jesus and think that that's true. But I don't think that they really care to comment too much about Jesus. Talk a little bit about I know this must have been really painful for at times, but how you navigated kind of post October 7th realities, all of what happened on campuses, all across the country, including Columbia, and how you balanced trying to continue to maintain relationships with people on all sides while really doing what you felt was the moral thing to do in that moment.
Yes, and it did feel that Morningside Heights with Union and Jewish Theological Seminary here in Barnard and Columbia, all of us together, that we were sort of the epicenter. It was like the match that got struck, that went across the country, and universities got struck here. And it was a very challenging time. Um, and from the beginning, I was horrified at what happened on October 7th and pleaded for the release of the hostages. But I've been involved also in the struggles in Palestine long enough to know that from the start, what was happening in Gaza and the West Bank, eventually Lebanon, and now all throughout the region, um, was grossly unjust and needed to be called into question and stopped. And so, how you both simultaneously affirm the value of all people, and then call into question the violence of groups that are choosing violence for their own purposes. And what happened in Gaza and in the West Bank so terribly, um, you can't be um, someone at Union, but a moral person and not be just horrified by this, but particularly the slaughter of children, the slaughter of people in hospitals and schools, and the devastation of whole, like as Trump most recently said about Iran, the destruction of a whole civilization. That this is okay to talk this way or do this. What was particularly difficult in this neighborhood was to see the way that Columbia responded to the encampment of students. Um, I respect the rights of universities to keep their campuses safe and welcome everybody, but the aggressiveness with which the NYPD was called in to remove students from an occupied building, and the violence of it, bringing on tanks and tear gases, guns, and shutting down the whole neighborhood. I'd never seen in my country that level of violence unleashed on a group of 40 students, but I'd never seen it unleashed, period. And I had to speak out about it. And so we opened our school, and students who were getting dismissed from surrounding campuses were coming here, meeting with their professors, trying to finish their degrees. And we just basically tried to create a sanctuary in the midst of all of that where everyone was welcomed. And we could also continue to stand up for what we thought was right, which was stop the killing. It also led for our board of trustees to make the decision to divest from companies that participated in the armaments industry that was creating the armaments used by Israel against Gaza. And so that was one very concrete action we took. We were one of the first groups to do that.
And how was it? How were you able to maintain your relationships with Jewish Theological Seminary and some of those others? I mean, I can imagine they were very strained, and but also, I know that you all, held events that were co-organized with JTS and some of the other schools.
Yes, we continued to meet and talk, and I had dinners at my house with half Union students, half JTS students, so we could have conversations. And there were times when those conversations were so painful, but they were honest, and at least we were talking.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. It goes without. I mean, we say it all the time, but to see it actually work, that staying in dialogue and staying in proximity in the midst of conflict makes all the difference in the world in terms of your ability to continue to hold on to and see the humanity in everybody. But it was very tense, very tense.
Yes, and ongoing, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You have a now kind of a internal viewpoint on like what makes a seminary tick, how to respond to moments. If we think about the future of this country and like what the country needs for religious leadership writ large, like you were head of Union, which is rooted in its Christian tradition, but kind of what does it mean for people to understand the role of religion in democracy? How do we do that in a way that religion can be a productive force in American democracy rather than a tool for authoritarianism?
Yes, and we've seen it be a tool for authoritarianism.
For sure.
Painfully so. There's so much that can be said and done, and you are doing it yourself through this podcast. We need to stop viewing the work of faith as simply limited to a congregation, and we need to see all of our neighbors and all of the people we don't even like as the congregation of the world. And we need to be able to help people actually feel. We were talking earlier about, our bodies, how damaging hatred is to your experience of being alive, and what it feels like to actually believe that the ultimate truth of the world is love
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
peace, and finding ever new ways in whatever faith tradition you're in or no faith tradition to help people just even expand their imagination and their physical experience of the world and turn themselves towards the beauty of love
Hmm.
and the power of it as a force.
I'm curious, like, I think that's so beautiful. One of the things that I came to Union with and really carried me was that, we have different languages, and some of them are preaching and some of, writing theology, but the arts is also really important. And I'm just curious, like, have you seen, are there any places where you've seen the expression of the arts doing some theological work, either at Union or we live in New York City, in New York City?
Yes, I mean, the arts ignites all of our senses. If it's well, I don't want to say what good art is, but that's what the arts does that no amount of lecturing in a classroom can do, and that is give you um, a vision of what things could be by stretching the edges of your imagination
I
to
love that.
see and feel things you didn't even know were possible. The arts
Yeah.
have the unusual power to do that, and if we don't cultivate them, we're losing, like, entire universe of knowing that is there at hand for us to feel and experience.
Yeah, I mean that it feels like, that there's so many modes of expression, and for me, like, a lot of my understanding of the divine is comes through arts rather than necessarily reading a book of theology or hearing a great sermon is actually like an artistic moment, but
It's
I mean that can be an art form. I am curious, like, one of the legacies you're leaving is that you're seeing an uptick in enrollment at Union. And I think that that's very promising. And I think that in some ways, there's ways to understand this moment as a real possibility for religion in America or spirituality or however we want to talk about it. Like, just seeing how many people are showing up, how many people really care. I see it all around the country, like how many people come to events we put on and like the spirit that they bring, even if they're not necessarily like explicitly from a religious tradition. So are you sensing that people are kind of wanting to express this and that Union and other places can tap into that desire?
Yes, I see it everywhere all the time, and I think part of what's happening is it's so easy to get sort of lulled into a life where you take most of what happens on a day-to-day basis for granted and you're comfortable in it. And right now, as things crumble and are challenged, people are asking deep questions. They don't have any choice but to ask deep
Hmm.
questions.
Hmm.
And it rattles them. And I mean, our students, they make no bones about the fact they really want to know, why am I here? Why are we here? Um, are we going to make it? What if we don't make it? How are we supposed to live between now and when we don't make it? What what kind of changes do we need to do that aren't just tweaking the system, but where did we go wrong and how do we think outside of the box to imagine new ways of being people? And when
Hmm.
I say that, it's like, how do we be human differently than we've ever been before? Because
That's
we know
a
this isn't working.
that's a nice question for as a mission statement. Love that. And do you find that people are still interested in going into congregational ministry, or is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's funny, at Union, we graduate more people going into congregational ministry than we admit.
Uh-huh.
So many people come here thinking, I've had a bad experience in the church. I like these big questions and I'm an activist and I'm gonna change the world, but not through religion. And they leave headed straight into church ministry. About more than half of our MDiv students go straight into pulpit ministry.
Uh-huh.
It's a very high percentage. It's the highest percentage, either church ministry or chaplaincy. So they're doing direct ministerial work.
Wow. Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and they
that.
go into when they come here, that it's actually the place where people are. If you want to engage the world, then you go to where people are. And they are in these communities where you can reach them in churches, you can reach them in hospitals and all the places where chaplaincy happens.
Yeah, I love that. It's so good. And that was my experience. I didn't go in thinking I was going to be ordained. And then Kathy Telvecchia, who is a field ed, guru for me, she said, you know what? Because I was like, oh, I'm going to go work in like a artist collective or something like that for my field ed. And she was like, why don't you work in a church? That's the freakiest thing you could do. And I was like, yeah, that is crazy. Can you imagine me in a church? And then lo and behold, it became like I was so moved by the power of a congregation that I was working in where everyone felt like they belonged there.
Yeah.
In a city where they didn't feel like they belonged anywhere else. They knew that they could come there and that they were 100% right to be there. And that's a radical idea. And not all churches can do that. But when they do that, it really is life-saving. And so, so I had that experience. Well, this is very exciting. And I think that there is a cusp moment for you, for all of us. And what will we do with that is a really interesting question. One of the themes that we've been working on since, for the last couple of years has been courage. And you've mentioned it a few times. And so what does courage look like to you? What are some of the contours of courage that you like to talk about?
Well, a lot of times when people talk about courage, they think it's all about, being loud and persistent and rigid and, you just charge in there. And for me, courage is intricately woven into having the commitment deep within yourself to be honest and to do what you believe and in the context of community is right. And if you're earnest, honest, true to yourself, then that is what courage is. That will drive you into the world with courage. It flows from your ability to have the Spirit flow through you. So it's not sort of an isolatable thing that you have over on one side called courage. Now I'm going to mobilize my courage. To have courage is to be truly yourself, active in the world and alive and engaged.
The Reverend Dr. Serene Jones has been for the last 18 years the president of Union Theological Seminary in New York City. After sabbatical, she'll be back as a professor. And in the meantime, we wish you the absolute best and congratulations on your incredible contribution to theological education.
Oh, thank you, Paul, and thank you for this great conversation. Always wonderful to talk with you.
Who do you know who would get a lot out of hearing this conversation with Serene Jones? Please share The State of Belief with them and be sure to subscribe to The State of Belief on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform. We need your help to continue growing The State of Belief, so please make a financial contribution today at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. The State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.